Riggs has termed the functionally diffuse society as fused and the functionally specific societies as diffracted. The society which is in its transition stage of development, Riggs terms it as a prismatic society. Using Parsonian approach, Riggs has hypothesized that a diffracted system would rank high in terms of universalism and achievement orientation, while a fused society is high in particularism and ascription, where they attribute their thing towards the birth, and with the prismatic model being intermediate in these terms. Thus, a prismatic society is characterized by selectivism, attainment, and polyfunctionalism. Riggs' analysis mainly focuses on the study of certain key elements of the social structures in a prismatic society and their interrelation with the Sala, that is, the administrative subsystem of that respective society. Though his fused and diffracted societies are sketchy, it is felt by the scholars, yet it helps in analyzing the rate of development for a society in transition stage, in this context prismatic society. Riggs has been primarily concerned to highlight the administrative problems in a transitional society. In doing so, he has identified three features in a prismatic society. There are heterogeneity, formalism, and overlapping. When it comes to heterogeneity, a prismatic society is characterized by a high degree of heterogeneity, which means the coexistence of different kinds of systems, practices, perspectives. One may thus find extreme qualities which reflect the wide disparities in society in terms of social, economic, religious, and cultural systems. One may also find extremely modern structures coexisting with traditional structures. Hence, there is an uneven development in the society. When it comes to formalism, where it refers to the degree of discrepancy between the formally prescribed and effectively practiced, between norms and realities, there is a high degree of formalism in a prismatic society. That is, actual behavior in prismatic society does not correspond to the legal statutes, even though the public officials may insist on following some of the laws literally, forgetting the spirit behind them. The level of formalism, according to Riggs, depends upon the type of pressure, whether it is exogenous or endogenous. Riggs views that if the pressure is exogenous, the degree of formalism is also higher. Conversely, the degree of formalism is relative less if the pressure is endogenous. The reason is, in an endogenous source of change, effective behavior precedes the establishment of formal structures, while for an exogenous source of change, which tries to adopt as much development from outside in the shortest possible time. Consequently, formalism creeps in, but the clauses of society do not change in the same pace. When it comes to overlapping, which refers to the extent to which formally a differentiated structure of a diffracted society coexists with undifferentiated structures of a fused type. In a prismatic society, the legislative, executive, and bureaucracy perform various administrative, political, economic, and social functions. In practice, their behavior is largely governed and controlled by certain traditional organizations like family, religion, caste, etc. There are several noticeable dimensions of overlapping in a prismatic society. They are nepotism, polycommunalism, polynormativism, lack of consensus, and authority versus control, about which we are going to discuss in detail. Nepotism. In the prismatic society, nepotism and favoritism play a dominant role in the making of appointments to various administrative posts. Members of family and their kin are given preference in employment and other matters. The close relative of a government official derive a variety of advantages from his official position in various ways. The Sala officer attaches importance to personal increase in power and material gains rather than paying attention to the social welfare of the people. His behavior and performance are influenced by parochialism, that is narrow-minded, and consequently the laws and rules are not practiced universally, even though it is in existence only in paper. Next is polycommunalism or clique. In a prismatic society, there is existence of many ethnic, religious and racial groups which live in relatively hostile interaction with each other. In such a polycommunal society, membership in various interest groups is largely community-based. If a member of a minority community is able to occupy a high position in a public or private organization, he begins to show preference to the members of his own community in administrative matters such as promotion, transfer, etc. Next is the prismatic economy, where we will be discussing about the bazaar canteen model. In a diffracted society, prices are determined essentially by the market factors of supply and demand. Conversely, arena factors considerations which determine balance of power, prestige and solidarity in the society dominate the economic system of a fused society, and the question of price hardly arises over here. In a prismatic society, there is a presence of both market and arena factors. They both interact with each other and produce a state of price indeterminacy, where it is generally impossible to determine a common price for a commodity or for a service. The economic organizations in a prismatic society generally act like a subsidized canteen, providing goods and prices at lower or at subsidized rates to the members of the privileged group and charging higher price to outside groups. In this model, a small section of people exercise control over economic institutions and exploit a large number of people. Bargaining, rebates, corrupt practices are some of the features of this process. The prices of goods and services may vary from person to person, place to place and from time to time. The price of any commodity and service depends on family context, individual relationships, bargaining power and politics. There is a form of subsidized canteen where the members of a particular group can buy things at subsidized prices. Conversely, in a tributary canteen, members of the less privileged, politically non-influential or members of the outside groups are charged higher prices for the same commodity, or they are not given the appropriate quantity of goods and services for the amount paid. The wage relations in a prismatic society are also determined on family and kinship considerations. A large number of public officials may get higher salaries without doing the work. On the contrary, people who work more may be paid less. In such a situation, low wage earners try to increase their incomes through illegal means, which again affects the economic subsystem of a prismatic society. So this includes like exploitation, social injustice, corruption, inflation due to price indeterminacy and discrimination. Therefore, all these form the features of a bazaar canteen model, which is the economic subsystem of a prismatic society. Next comes is polynormativism. In a prismatic society, people subscribe to different values and norms of their own. These lead to differences in society. Moreover, the traditional and modern ideas coexist and are in hostility with each other. As a result of overlapping, decision making becomes more complicated. The Sala bureaucrat may enter into service by virtue of his success in competitive examinations, but in respect of his promotion and career development, he depends largely on ascriptive ties and seeks favors from his superior bureaucrat. A Sala official may insist on a strict enforcement of regulations by the public, but when his personal issue is involved, he may openly violate them. So, Right to Information Act, for instance in India, is intended to bring in transparency in government processes, but in reality, it suffers from incompetent and corrupt officials who are reluctant in disclosing information to the public domain. For example, a person who wrote an application to the Information Commission under the RTA Act was threatened by the information officials. Next is authority versus control. Rick says that the prismatic society consists of a highly centralized and concentrated authority structure overlapping a control system that is highly localized and dispensed. Thus, authority and control overlap each other. Rick is of the view that bureaucrats in an unbalanced polity dominate the politico-administrative system. As the role of bureaucrat largely affects the level of output, Rick says that there is an inverse ratio between administrative output and bureaucratic power. A prismatic society faces pressure for change from external sources as well as internal ones. Ricks felt that it is precisely the heterogeneity that is being imbibed in the prismatic society which introduces numerous complexities and difficulties in formulating and implementing policies and decisions, and so contributes to both formalism, that is discrepancy between the formally prescribed and practiced, and also overlapping. Undoubtedly, Rick's theory of prismatic society is a valuable contribution for comparative public administration in spite of its methodological constraints. But he has presented an ecological view of development as an increasing ability to make and carry out collective decisions that are affecting the environment. On the other hand, Rick's theory of prismatic society was never without criticism. In fact, scholars consider that in the absence of quantitative indicators, it becomes difficult to measure the level of development or level of prismaticism. Rick's models are termed as based on certain assumptions, and lack of empirical evidence to prove the assumptions raises questions about the validity of the model. Though Rick's models have been criticized, it does not mean that these have not made any contribution to development administration. In fact, he has given enough of interpretation to frame workable structures to accomplish goals of development administration. It is evident by now that public administration is not just based on Weber's ideal type bureaucracy. In fact, Weber's model has been used as an yardstick for comparing different administrative systems. Most comparative administrative group scholars agree that Weber's model does not coincide with the reality, but there are some general characteristics of administration in developing societies, so about which we have explained the models of F.W. Ricks. Scholars are of the view that the treatment of influence of administration on environment is relatively weak in the field of comparative public administration. In fact, scholar Ramesh K. Arora is of the view that the ecological perspective has to be capable of explaining the impact of administration on the environment and also the impact of environment on the administration. However, the models of Weber and Ricks are inadequate to explain the dynamic components of administrative system in a constantly changing environment. Scholars are of the view, though dynamic elements do exist in Ricks' model, yet it is not highly developed. The administrative thinkers of the late 19th century emphasized mainly on the means, that is, the ends or goals. In a way, ends have been generally identified, or we can say equated with economy and efficiency. This blurring of ends and means did not pose serious threat to large-scale organizations where they performed like the functions were routine and non-developmental character. Even bureaucracy, Weber's bureaucracy, who is considered as a major forerunner of comparative public administration, did not deal sufficiently about identifying the priorities or identifying the goals and setting priorities and achieving the targets. In fact, the early literature that was in existence in that late 19th century, it was relatively weak in the study of goals. And it was Edward Weidner who highlighted the negligence of the study of goals in the literature of public administration. With intent to fill the gap in that administrative theory, he developed the concept of development administration. So we can say, to conclude, we can say the comparative public administration, no doubt it has created a great impact on the theory development of public administration and also in the development of concepts of like development administration also as well. But yet it has got its own flaws, maybe methodological flaws. But it was said, like, unless and until a system is studied in its ecological setting, we cannot make a science, or it cannot be claimed as a science.
There is a science of public administration in the making. And how you can in fact make that science of administration is by studying the behavioral patterns of the administrators or administrative systems in a cross-national and a cross-cultural setting. And then once you are wanting to study the administrative behavioral patterns across cross-national and cross-cultural settings, you try to put that into a rigorous scientific test. And once it is tested, you draw some hypothesis, what he said, that can be construed as a general theory of public administration. How does Riggs fall in these four propositions?
Okay, probably Riggs' study or his scientific, we cannot claim it as scientific, but still it paved way, or it provided a platform for other scholars to construct models for their respective countries. Because in this, what Riggs found was the ecological setting of a particular system plays a major role in making and informing decisions and policies. So he felt like the structures which he studied in a cross-cultural setting was quite similar. Like for example, the Sala model, that is the administrative subsystem, it was quite similar with the developing countries, and also the kind of problems which are faced in developing countries are quite same. So he felt that while drawing a conclusion about this comparative public administration, he felt that the ecology plays a major role, and he also he tried to evolve.
What exactly by Riggs' construction is ecology? What exactly he thinks is ecology?
He feels by studying the different subsystems of the entire system, and also the interaction that is being taken between the systems and within as well as that is intra as and inter. So this kind of dynamism that is existing between these systems and subsystems, he felt this needs to be given more importance.
Does it contribute to the science of administration? Because
definitely, ma'am, because it is being evolved in an ecology, like the setting, the environment is there, and it is like the administrative subsystem is not studied in isolation, whereas it is being studied as an entire thing, as a whole. So
okay, that's very right. And on the whole, what I feel is,
yes,
in a cross-national setting,
yes,
across nations, developing nations, different nations, they have different cultures and different settings. So he tried to study the prismatic society or the administrative model, that is the Sala model, across national settings, or cross national settings, or cross institutional settings, or cross societal settings. And also it was not only just the cross settings, it was also inter and intra. So I think it helps in drawing some propositions or hypotheses regarding the science of public administration, the ecology of administration, ecology of ideas given by Fred W. Riggs, right? So any more questions, or we can just...
Yeah, I just have one question pertaining to the prismatic Sala model of Riggs. Do you feel that the contemporary scenario in India, whether pertaining to the political, the judicial, or the media, does it corroborate with the prismatic Sala model of Riggs?
Yes, it is a continuous problem. Like it is not something which existed in those decade, like probably 1950s or 60s, from where this theory evolved. But even it is there, like poverty, which was in existence right from prior to independence. The problems are same, and it can be applicable even to today's situations, because what we are facing today is the same kind of overlapping heterogeneity and the kind of formalism. There is a high degree of formalism in our country, so it is there in our country. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone or shall we in fact just why Riggs used the word prismatic? What is basically why he uses that word prismatic?
Actually, he wanted to. He has taken the concepts from science, especially from physics. He has taken, like, prismatic is something kind of it is kind of like different colors in a like when a ray of light passes through a prism.
Okay.
It emits 7 different colors. So what he wanted to study was when a kind of system or a kind of law or some kind of structures is introduced in a developing society, that is prismatic society. He felt different kinds of discrepancies, or we can say what they wanted was different, means the expected outcome was different, but what was actually happened, that is different. So that is, in that ways we can correlate, like a prism and also this developing society, we can correlate each other.
Or something like, you know, a few society going on to become a developed country. So this is a chain, this is a cycle, or this is a continuum,
Yes.
where it passes through that stage of development.
Yes.
And means it is developing.
Exactly.
So some fused elements are also there,
There.
and some diffracted elements are also there, which gets reflected in terms of the variant lights.
In fact, ma'am, he used this agraria and industrial typology based
Right.
on that structural functional approach. But he found that there is some sort of means he couldn't conclude what was exactly happening. Like once he divided like agraria and industria, something was missing, and that missing link was in fact the society which was in the transition stage of development. And hence, in his next typology, he included this agraria, transitia, and industria typology, wherein he equated this prismatic society to that of the transition stage of society. And in fact, he studied the coexistence of different structures, like traditional structures,
Plus
and
the-
all, which is very predominant in fused society, and also the diffracted structures. That is, functional specificity was also there. So he could see like the coexistence of both these. In fact, this kind of development, it came when these Western thinkers, when they wanted to put or make this developing nations, when they they wanted to develop them. So some of the Western concepts were introduced without taking into consideration of the ecological settings of the developing nations. So that is how he was able to make out the problems. He was able to draw certain conclusions based on that, and that is how
I
this.
think, you know, basically, sure.
Yeah, and that is what, like, I just want to add that is what exactly Wilson did not want when he spoke of his comparative method also. He never wanted that. He wanted that the environment should play a vital role when bringing in the best suitable methods of other countries also. So when these things were introduced in the developed countries, or in the developing countries, probably the environment aspects were not taken into account, and that is why we had
Actually, the environment was not as compatible as it was there in developed society. The kind of what Riggs felt was, he coined a term called as discretion. Like, he felt the degree of discretion is high in developed society, and that is what makes a developed society to adapt, or in fact they are capable of changing themselves.
Flexibility
Is there as per the changing needs of the society, whereas this sort of that discretion is not there in prismatic society, and that is how they find it difficult to evolve themselves or to come out of their problems, kind of thing. So
okay, like for example, in India, we have the local governance unit Panchayati Raj, but at least we have the Khap Panchayat also prevailing with it,
Yes.
parallel with it. So such kinds of examples still we have, and it has been since the times when Riggs did the study, and we still retain those prismatic characteristics in our society, and especially so in our administration, which we see is becoming so rent-seeking and so corrupt. Despite all stages of traditional public administration and NPM, and today we talk about NPS and all coming in, but then still we retain that prismatic traits and Sala traits.
Yes, and to quote, today is in fact International Women's Day. We are celebrating women,
So-
but at the same time we have people who feel that the birth of a girl child is still a taboo. So this is also
These are all the notions
contracting-
which coexist,
contradicting notions.
So contradictory notions and contradictory practices and traditions along with modernity coexist since the time like when Riggs came up, and it's all these 40-50 years we still retain those practices. So we are becoming, I think, more and more prismatic rather than diffracted, more salistic rather than more diffracted
diffracted.
societies.
So the pattern of behavior has to be modified before any structures can be brought in. It is not the structures which make successful. It is the attitude of the people. It is the way they perform that is going to determine the success of any system. Of any model, be it whether it is from a developed country or from a developing country. So unless and until this can be sorted out, means individually this realization has to come.
I think the ecology that time of British Raj,
Yes.
we still retain
We
with
still
us. That license Raj,
License Raj.
red tapeism, rent-seeking behavior. Okay, so now we should just have just some time left for the NPS, that is the New Public Service. And why did New Public Service came? Anyone can tell me that. Why did New Public Service come? Like we said about traditional public administration and NPS and comparative, where was the need for a movement called the New Public Service? Like what propelled or what brought into the notion in the subject or discipline of public administration? Why there was a need? Just
You
a
want
quick
to bring about a kind of reform in the bureaucratic system.
right.
That is what led probably to the evolution, the autocratic behavior of the bureaucrats.
Bureaucracy. And how about the NPM? NPM
NPM
also was a reason for
trying to
NPS to come
recall,
in. NPS followed this
NPM.
this NPM was
NPM.
there at the back of it. So what was there basically that called for this NPS in the field of public administration? The market. But then why? Why was market considered so offending? Because it did not pay attention to the citizens.
Citizens. In fact,
It was just
Denhart,
please.
Denhart was very much influenced by all this traditional public administration or classical public administration, and in fact he studied this public interest or these ideals like public service, accountability, and all such these values in terms of traditional public administration, and then new public administration and new public management. And what he found exactly was there was so much of like reforming or re-engineering the structures and processes that are existing in the administration
Right.
line.
Right.
But he felt that it should be like the reforms should be like in congruence with the kind of expectations from the people. Like mere re-engineering and reforming the administrative is not enough, but also it should come from the people. Like he mentioned, like responsible citizens and responsive administration should go hand in hand. And that is how it determines the success of governance.
Yeah.
In fact, he New Public Service, why he evolved the system, probably I feel like he wanted to bring citizens into the center stage of development, because in new public management and also the traditional public administration, the citizens were considered as the beneficiaries. And they were just the providers, that is the state, they just provided. They were just the citizens had no kind of choice. They just have to get it whatever they give. So when it comes
that
to
the participation of the citizens,
was not at all
that
there.
is what he wanted to bring in.
Yeah. And whereas in the case of new public management, the citizens, though they were elevated from the stage of beneficiaries to kind of customer, or we can say from beneficiary to client in the case of new public administration. Next, from client, it went to the customer centric thing, where the customers have got wide variety of choices. They can go for a quality kind of service. They can opt out for any kind of like quality in terms of quality. And new public management was customer centric. So like basically I'm talking about the kind of the people, the users point of view I'm talking. So probably there must be other kind of elements also which paved way for the evolution of new public service. But basically I wanted to concentrate on the citizens, and it was Denhart who felt the need to bring the citizens as a main beneficiary, or not beneficiary, in fact participants. He wanted the citizens to participate because they are getting influenced by the decisions. So it is like the citizens wanted, like they wanted whatever they wanted to have. They have a say, they have a stake, the developmental process, and that is how he would have felt. He talked about the theories of citizenship also.
That is what is the theory of public choice. When we talk of public choice, that is giving a wide variety, a wide arena of choice for the citizens. What you are talking about is I equate it with the public choice theory.
No, theory of citizenship is
Public
quite
choice is
different. And
Public
public
choice is
choice theory is different. Public choice theory, it was like a kind of it paved way for the emergence of new public management. It provided the customers to opt out for umpteen choices. That is different. Whereas public, in the sense, it means theory of citizenship totally different.
That
Like
is-
the rights and
yeah.
responsibilities of the citizens, it's not only just to vote in periodical elections, but it is something. What it is manifested at the time of election is just 1%, and the rest is something like the rights and responsibilities which they have to undergo,
Like
which
they of their own they try
their
to
own.
contribute. They are
Exactly.
not
Take
just
out initiative.
like what I can gather is, like when you say about public choice. Public choice is basically where the individual is important,
yes,
Yes.
not the community,
Community.
right? So that individual is an economic man.
Yes.
He is very much rational and very completely rational. When like administrative man is rational, but the economic man is completely rational.
rational.
And so he is such a fellow who is very egoistic, who is very
Self-interested.
self-regarding,
Regarding.
and he is maximizing his own benefits.
Benefits.
So as a decision maker in NPM, that public manager is an economic man. Okay, so it's very different from what NPS says. NPS sees individual not as an individual. He says that individual is able to satisfy his own needs, his own personal interest in the larger context of the community concerns. So he never tries to overtake the community concerns for his own benefit.
Yes.
But in public choice, which is the background and framework for NPM, he is a utility maximizer. He will take a decision which maximizes the benefit at the least cost possible. So there is where, and what they assume, the NPM assumes, or the public choice theorists assume, that even if people are not like that, you assume that they are like that, because it becomes easy for explaining the human behavior. So that is where that public choice theory is a very economist and very technical kind of a study, kind of an approach. Which literally puts all the social and economic and the cultural variables, the needs and aspirations of your environment into that kind of a mere technical kind of analysis. And they say apply the decision making approaches like game theory or incremental approach, and you have policies to solve these problems. But then where is the human angle in that? That is very important. And why we fail always in whatever the kind of organizations we have, we fail basically because we always tend to remove the field, the community, the grassroots, the practical aspects. We keep everything in the stands. We don't want to let out to the field. So if everything we start seeing from that metaphoric angle, there is where we go wrong. And there is where we only see, we have a very partial or a blinkered vision for the organization. So when we see organization, it is a structure having men, material, machines, and it put all these things together to achieve predetermined objectives. Now, objectives are predetermined. Who determined it? You, not the people. So you keep that field, that area which is so vital for the sustenance and for the performance and for efficiency of your organization away, because you have a blinkered and a metaphorical view of understanding public administration. And there is where the theory or understanding of the administration lifestyle is very partial. Okay, so what we got from the British Raj, where administration was just to implement what the Britishers thought. Britishers thought, planned, and you implemented. So administrators were just performing that instrumental role. But now the scenario is not that. Public interest is important. Why? Because post-economic reforms, there came a kind of a new kind of an involvement by the civil society. And there is where we talk about that collective decision making, where we have not only the government, not only the bureaucracy, not only the private sector, but the third important ideology, that is the civil society, and which can be construed in a number of ways. It can be the very citizen, it can be the grassroots organizations, it can be a social movements, it can be a non-governmental organizations, it can be a voluntary organizations, it can be any kind of an association, a partnership association. So all this comes under this wider group of what we call civil society today. And as part and parcel, and why it is considered important in NPS, it gives importance to what you said, democratic citizenship. That citizen doesn't work only for his own interest. He looks into the larger interest. He adopts a very larger and a very broader perspective which requires knowledge of public affairs. So don't think that citizen in the village is dormant or he is very laid down. He is ignorant. No. He's having the capability of knowing those public affairs. He has that knowledge of public affairs better than you.
Yes.
And then he has a sense of belongingness. This is my community. A concern is there. And he is very much bonded with the community in which he is a part and parcel of. So they are not self-interested. And when we try to see in terms of civil society, the civil society or these organizations, whether we say from the neighborhood groups or you say about the work groups in offices and all, also the places where we work, they try to make this individual or this community not just being ruled, they rule also. They are having that willingness to honor the rights of others. As I am possessing my right, I am also willing to honor the rights of the other person. I am able to put my decisions or my interest below the community's interest. And I do have one duty. It doesn't come with all kinds of rights being given to you. It comes with a duty, an obligation on part of each and every one of us as part of that community to serve and defend our own community, our own public. So this is basically, if we have time, so this is basically when Dennard says that NPS fetches many ideas from the premises of democratic citizenship, but citizens are just not self-interested. They look beyond having a contact and a feeling, a bonding with their own community. And how can this citizenship be retained is that you allow them continually to participate and deliberate. So the administrator has now to, what you said, engage the people and they mutually work together in defining the problems and implementing the solutions. This is it. And accountability, as in traditional public administration, just does not rest with the political leaders, that you are accountable to the political leaders, or as in NPM, the government is accountable to the customers for giving that high performance and going as per what they have demanded. The customers demand, the government provides those services because the customers are to rate the government. But then it is not even the customers here. It is you have to be accountable to your people. Accountability is to those community norms. To even you are accountable by your ethical conduct. So all these in fact are very important. Accountability of the administrators to the citizens. They are known as, they have accountability to multifaceted aspects. They are just not implementers. They are now enablers. They are now facilitators. They educate the community to participate. They are facilitators. They are what we say reform bringers. They bring in reforms. They are public relation managers. They are crisis managers. They are advocates and analysts. And more so, as what Terry says in 1995 and Vinson and Crowther say in 1998, more so they are moral leaders and stewards and emissary of public interest. So this is where we find the entire way of looking at public service changes, and this has been basically involving the public servants all over the world, and that is where they are now getting into learning those new skills and how to develop the policies with the citizens, and the way they are treating the citizens is with a renewed sense of dignity and respect. And that is where now the citizens also, once felt alienated by the very system was supposed to serve them, is now reposing their trust and faith in the administration. This is it. So they both are working together in a mutually and beneficial way. So the question of NPS is not how efficiently and how rationally you implement the policy, but how your act can contribute to the better of all.